Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tays, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here tonight, both in person and virtually, to celebrate the launch of In Our Backyard, Keeyask and the Legacy of Hydroelectric Development, published by the University of Manitoba Press. We are here with the editors Aimée Craft, Jill Blakley, and our special guest, Robert Spence. And you'll be hearing from all of them, who are much more interesting speakers than myself in just a moment. I just have a few exciting housekeeping notes to review first. The first is that while you're within the event space, we just ask that you please keep your masks on. All those who end up behind a microphone will remove theirs to speak. Once you're actually beyond this wall, at that point, it'll just be recommended, but not obligatory, although we do recommend it. The signing will take place immediately beside the cash desk. So after all the presentations are through and after you've asked some questions to tonight's guests, we'll ask you to remain seated for one moment, and then we'll bring our special guests over to that table so they can sign copies of the book for you. And I'll have more information on that in just a moment. There will be time for a Q&A as well. So at that point, what I will do is I'll circulate through the audience with this wireless microphone and just place it dramatically in front of your mask so that you can intone it, your question into the microphone, and then it can be heard by all those watching. Just as this is a bit of an audio stream, we ask that you do limit your questions to a question rather than an extensive comment if at all possible, as you'll have ample time to convey any other thoughts that you might have to the editors when you get to the table thereafter. Other than that, that's essentially it for me. But thank you all so very much for joining us. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can also join in the conversation as well. Please feel free to just write your questions into the chat. I now have the immense pleasure of introducing one of the editors for this evening. Aimée Craft is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa and an Anishinaabe Métis lawyer from Manitoba. She co-leads a series of major research grants on decolonizing water governance and works with many Indigenous nations and communities on Indigenous relationships with and responsibilities to NIBI, or water. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Aimée Craft.
It's nice to see everyone this evening. Have any of you? I love the title that they gave it because when you're doing something like birthing a book, it can be super challenging. And I'm so pleased to be here with Jill, who is the co-editor of this book, and many of the authors who are sitting interspersed throughout the audience here. And with our friend Robert, who is part of the inspiration for this book. About 10 years ago, we sat at the Clean Environment Commission, stood. It was a bit of a dance, Terry, the former chair. You know, we had a wealth of experiences in learning about the potential impacts of the Keeyask Dam and of the story of hydroelectric development in northern Manitoba. And a lot of it was brought forward in expert evidence and community voices. And after the extensive hearing, Jill and I were part of a teleconference and with a group of people who said, we can't let this story be untold. It can't end with the end of this hearing. It can't become something that's archived. Manitobans need to know about the legacy of hydroelectric development. They need to know about this particular project. They need to understand the landscape of and the waterscape of northern communities that have been impacted by hydro and continue to be impacted. So Jill and I said, we'll do this. We'll take on putting together all of these voices. And these voices are a collection of some of the expert reports that were gathered in the context of that hearing, put forward to analyze whether there'd be significant adverse effects resulting from the building of this dam. And also community voices, which were so impactful to the deeper understanding of what was happening, what is currently happening, and what the future looks like for First Nations in Northern Manitoba. So it was a privilege to be part of that hearing, to help bring these voices into this volume. It's almost 10 years in the making, and U of M Press has been wonderful in helping us realize this vision. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for reading the book. I know some of you haven't yet, but this is my usual thing, is I ask a question and then have you email me later with your answer once you've read the book. So I'll give you my question a little bit later, but I look forward to your comments and your thoughtful reactions to what you're going to read here and what you're going to hear this evening. I was noting earlier that John has organized every single one of my book launches. This is just the third one. I want to say every single one. And at the last one, my niece Lucy read from the book and she spoke. She answered some of the questions. She is one of my mentors and role models, and a person I admire very much. And so I couldn't ask her to be part of this. And I thought, who embodies that same ethic of love and care and thoughtfulness? And Robert, you came to mind immediately, because this book in many ways, actually probably wholly factually, would not have come to be in existence without your powerful words. So it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Spence, who is from Tataskweyak Cree Nation, has been a commercial fisherman, a hunter, a father, a councillor for his nation, and is an amazing painter. And I have yet to go hunting with you, but I've heard you're a pretty darn good hunter. So I'm inviting myself right now. All right, let's go hunting together. So yeah, Robert, thank you so much for making the journey to Winnipeg and for being here to share in this and to share a bit about your thoughts and experience. Good.
Ninanas ko muna no sa tinaman minanas ko momentu ano sa te menetawat tayo ya ada sa isbento mi kaya ano so ta pigas kaya na businessista sa isemina ko siya man to isemina da businessista kaya muin wasto da boda nanas ko maya tatgi sa man to ite hina da tostiam ya manay nagamamit tanen sa ganano. I thank everybody who made all of this possible. Thank you, Aimée. Thank you. And my brother's sitting over here. Les, Gerald, Will. Really nice to see you guys. I have to thank the Creator first for bringing us all together here, especially for this and for what we're here for, on all the effects of negative impacts and effects of Manitoba hydro development has had on our people. I brought this brother to give me the strength that I needed to talk about these things, that we need to get out to the rest of the South, to the rest of the world. Because these things aren't easy to talk about, because they affect us every day. Every day it affects our spirits and our souls. What we have to go through with the impacts and with the decisions that are made down here in the south that we have to live for in the north. Is a mistahi. 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 Mitanega Gwana Swat, Tigoyani, and Otande, Desi Tipimatsia. Too many times the government thinks that we should be the submissive little words of the state, where we live in the north, where most of the majority of the power comes from. This is the first time in my whole life, I'm 52 years old, that I've ever heard the two words ever brought together in my life: geographical racism, environmental racism. I never thought you could put those two words together to explain what's happening. And racism itself is a dirty word, but to put it into context with geographical and environmental, that's a whole new other realm that those people in the South don't even understand. We live with the effects day in and day out, every day, 24/7, 365. It's not as easy as flicking a switch like you would at home with your homes. It impacts us every day on a daily basis. Whenever you turn your light switch on, whenever you turn it off, whenever you press a button on something, you got to remember that that power comes from a territory so expansive that it's been so devastated and so ruined by the development that the South says it needs, or the power that they say it needs, like Keeyask, for example. That dam was not necessary. We tried to stop that dam from going up. Now there are only 2 elders alive from our community now that who are still with us, who fought against that dam, who went to the dam to protest against the dam, to try and stop that dam, to blockade it. One of the elders who we will be burying next week, I know there's only 2 left. And that's pretty hard for me to accept, because that leaves a pretty big responsibility on people like Les and myself, or us to shoulder and bear. Kasi gano mo tayo tugisega. Muna iwe tende na nina na mo tayo matuskelen. This work that we carry with us every day is not something that we chose to do. It chose us long before we were born, to walk the road that we're walking today. We didn't decide to one day just, hey, what the heck, I'm just gonna go fight hydro today. I'm gonna go block something. I'm gonna go stir up some. I caught myself. I gotta remember, I can't. That's one of the reasons why I'm holding this. Back home at Keeyask, we fought so hard against that dam. We tried what we could. We listened to our elders. We took it upon ourselves, upon the direction of the elders, to do what we could. But they say, don't ever give up. Uskat sa komostiro tameguma. Kiam zegis yane, kiam gustachene, kana gina kiskito tazo, doge boss kaiyene. Don't think about yourself. I know you're gonna be afraid when you get out there. You don't know what to expect. But do what you need to do for the little ones, for the ones here now and for the ones coming that aren't born yet. So that's what we're supposed to do. That's who we're working for when we take it upon ourselves to go out there and put ourselves on the front lines to fight the fight we're fighting. Because the impacts are real. Day in and day out. One of the first things that we're taught as little kids when we're growing up on the land is never drink the water between two beaver dams. And you know why, right? They call it beaver fever, giardia. There's a lot of bacteria in there, a lot of no-nos that you want to ingest and put inside your body. But what do we live between now? Big, gigantic beaver dams, Manitoba hydro dams, multiplied 100-folds over. When we talk about the water and the health of the water, it connects everything all around us, everything that they studied around the Keeyask Dam. I was part of those studies. I worked part of those studies as well. And I couldn't believe that we didn't even make it on the radar. Manitoba Hydro spent millions and millions of dollars on studying mouse droppings, squirrel droppings. But at the same time, it was also humbling not even to make it on that radar, to be below the mice that because we speak for them too. Every living creature we speak for, not just for ourselves, but we have to speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. We never made it on the radar. They didn't study us or the effects or the impacts that would be created for us. We're expected to live such a natural world, to be good, obedient little servants, wards of the state. But how can one live a natural world in an artificial environment created by the hand of man? Manitoba Hydro. How can one expect to live such a natural life in an artificial surrounding? We can't. Imagine, if you will, an aquarium that's unkept and dirty. What color would that aquarium turn to if you don't change the filters in that aquarium, in that fish tank? That aquarium will turn green. The algae and the bacteria that grow in there will become toxic. The same thing that's happening with the waters up in the north. With every water that hydro touches and impacts and affects. South Indian Lake, they said that South Indian Lake would come back to what it was 50 years ago, in 50 years' time, right? Well, now the knowledge that we have with the science that they used is the same science that we're using to prove that it'll probably take a whole lifetime, maybe 2 lifetimes, to get it back to the way it used to be. We're not going to see it in our lifetime. But the fight we fight today for the ones who are little today and the ones not here yet is the fight that we're fighting for. That's who we're fighting for when we're fighting these kinds of injustices to our people in the north. So many people have lost their lives doing what they loved to do before, but has been taken away from the south. The powers that be in the south, from the south. I keep asking myself day to day, why do we have to live with the decisions that were made by people who live in the south, who do not ever step foot, one foot in the north? When a decision is made, when policies are made, laws are passed, when decisions are made for the people who live in the north, by people in the south, how fair is that when you don't have to live those conditions that we have to live with day in and day out? When our culture is being impacted and bombarded by the changes that are forced upon us every day, we're having to replace little things with big things that we've lost. A way of life is what we're losing, a connection to our water. The women carry the power of birth within them by carrying the child within them. I've often told my wife, it's, you know how this is all gonna come back, how it's all gonna work. It's gonna have to be the women that come back to start making the changes that we need to see today. I wish my wife was here today, because I've told her time and time again, it's the women that are gonna make these changes. Just like the two beautiful ladies I'm sitting with here today. But I'll probably be wishing that she was here even more so now. Because she's been my strength and my rock through all of this. It's hard for me to try and stay strong when we've lost so much. I blame Manitoba Hydro. I blame it so much on Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro and the government of Canada for things that have happened to our people. Truth and reconciliation is just a word that's thrown around just to buy time, it seems, when you don't even see the actions that it requires to bring the changes that are required to rectify the wrongs that have been done upon the people that are suffering, still suffering today. I've forgotten a lot of things that I was supposed to remember because of trauma or shock, I'm told, but I don't know what it is really. I've recently lost a son to suicide, July 1st, 2021. And I often think that if I was still a fisherman, that if there was still more fish in the water, that I would be still fishing and that my son would still be in that boat with me. But because there are no more fish, but because the water is dirty, polluted, contaminated, filled with silt and sediment floating down so many different river systems like Churchill River Diversion, Burntwood, Odie, Grassy, Nelson. It's hard to lay a finger on any one thing, what I blame for losing my son. I partly blame myself too, but I have to look at this in a way that is positive now. I have to honor my son's life because I just learned right before coming here, there was a documentary you put on just a couple days before he took his life. It's called One River, Many Relations. Dr. Steph McLaughlin, I think, was part of that. And I didn't know that until just a couple days ago. And my son put that video on, the effects from the development of the oil sands, I believe, right? I wasn't really paying attention to it because I was just watching my son laying there. And in a way, it seemed as though he was telling me to continue on with what we're doing, with the fight that we're fighting today. And so that's kind of the reason why I agreed to come here, because this is part of a healing journey, not just for me, but for my family as well, for my daughter. Because my daughter here is a little hunter. She's done sturgeon work and wrestled more sturgeon than possibly just about any man in here. Oh, God bless. She's a little sturgeon wrangler. And she's carrying on. She took part in sturgeon studies, so she's taken on the role and responsibility of one day, hopefully taking on this fight to protect the sturgeon on the Churchill River, because there's only about 3,000 of them left. That's maybe 750 to 850 adult spawning sturgeon that only spawn once every 5 years. That's sad, considering that the augmented flow program is ruining both South Indian Lake and the lower Churchill River. It's sad that that water is being used to generate power at the Keeyask Dam, for power that we really don't need, that is really unnecessary, because that power was supposed to be sold to Saskatchewan, Alberta, the States, Minnesota, Minneapolis, to the States. But it couldn't even generate any power last summer because there was no water. That was it. Starve them dry. You know, the Keeyask Dam has brought with it what our elders foresaw and foretold from the very beginning when they said, "Kami nagapit sa matao kani nagamistigo sa boda gipay ano kapeso anatistigo." Is what they said. Don't let the people from the south, the boat people, they said, because that's what you translate mistigo to. It's not white people, it's boat people that landed here on this continent. Don't let them win by allowing them to build another dam. Dagipahagig sipi no dagibit nakik. Mr. Hidaga Bitagodawag Matsige Wana. They'll be bringing a whole lot of other stuff that will follow right behind them. Minihuin alcohol, Matsimaskisia, drugs. We've seen a whole influx of that since Keeyask started. I can't even remember what year Keeyask was built. I mean, I know whether the first block key. That's one of the things I forgot. But they had to take out the ATMs out of Keeyask because so much money was being spent from the workers that were there on drugs that were being taken into the campsite of Keeyask. There was people from our community leaving our community broke to go to work at Keeyask that were coming back even broker, owing drug dealers even more money than they were making. It was not even only our community, but other communities that were affected and impacted by that as well. An influx of alcohol came into our community. I was a constable for 7 years. I've seen the effects of what alcohol and drugs can do, but then after Keeyask, the severity and the kinds of drugs and the amount of drugs coming in was far more scarier than when I was a constable, because relatives who were family, people who were relatives, I didn't know anymore because it turned them into someone I didn't know anymore. The night that my son took his life, I was wrestling my nephew, who's considerably taller and a little huskier than me. Constables were there on the road. Things happened and we controlled it. But I forgive my nephew for that. It wasn't him that did what he did, that hit me that night. It wasn't him. It was the drugs that took over him. It was alcohol and the drugs that fouled the minds of the youth that ended up taking their lives too. It was because of what followed behind Keeyask is what ultimately led to the decisions that some of the youth had made to take their own lives in our community. We declared a state of emergency because of it. It didn't happen when we wanted it to, but it eventually happened. And now we see our waters. It's not water. I have to say it's not water. Water you can drink. You guys saw the site. Hydro calls that clean, green, renewable energy. The water that flows by our communities, South Indian and the Nelson River on Split Lake, is the color of the chairs that you're sitting on right now. That's not water, that's sludge. Renewable. How can a water renew itself when you take away its ability to be able to clean and filter itself? When the vegetation that the water relies on to clean and filter itself out through a natural process by flowing kilometers and kilometers down a river through lakes and many river systems to catch the contaminants and pollutants and the silts and sediments through its waters, through the vegetation that it goes past and beyond. When you take those out, the water can no longer filter itself. So now we end up with a sludge. It's blue-green, it's brown, it's green, it's gray. It has many different colors to the rainbow. It's brown, chocolate brown too. Many different colors. Here, the city of Winnipeg drinks water from Shoal Lake 40. That's how many kilometers away? 135, 145 kilometers away from the city of Winnipeg, and yet the city of Winnipeg sits between the Assiniboine and the Red. And then we have the Selkirk that's just sitting downriver from Winnipeg. They don't even drink water from the Red. They drink it from underground aquifers, 4 pumps, 4 wells. And then you have Gimli, Manitoba, sitting on a 10th inland largest lake in Canada, I believe. They don't even drink water from its source, Lake Winnipeg. But still, this water is relied upon to flow north to power those dams. And then now you have projects like Lake St. Martin, Lake Manitoba Diversion Project that this government of Manitoba is proposing to divert Lake Manitoba waters into Lake Winnipeg to alleviate the amount of flooding on Lake Winnipeg. On Lake Manitoba, it says, but we know it's ultimately to add more water to the system to power more dams in the north. If that project goes through, you'll have another Churchill River diversion, right, Les? You will have another CRD on your hands. You will have another ecological disaster on your hands like we did in 2017, right? When Manitoba Hydro washed away all their water gauging stations, well, a majority of their water gauging stations on the lower Churchill River, right? Canada's water gauging stations, Manitoba Hydro's water gauging stations. When we had a meeting with Manitoba Hydro, the province, and some other people, we asked them, why aren't your water gauging stations sending data to us anymore? Well, they looked over at Hydro to see if it was okay to answer the question. You're Canada. You're supposed to be representing us and protecting our interests and protecting our rights. Why are you looking at Manitoba Hydro? They're just a crown corporation. Why are you looking at them for approval to answer that question? Well, answer it. You owe it to us. They said, well, they kind of washed away, kind of. They released so much water all at once through Missy Falls after holding so much water back, right? They flooded South Indian Lake. They flooded Gower Lake, Thornsteinson Lake. And I've heard people from South Indian saying that they've never seen water as high as they did, probably 20 feet, 30 feet higher than they've ever seen before. And yet when something like that happens in BC, from a tailings ponds disaster, a levee or a dam that breaks from a tailings pond, it breaks the news, it's all over the news. But when it's created by man, Manitoba Hydro, why doesn't it get the same coverage? Out of sight, out of mind. Environmental, geographical racism, out of sight, out of mind, because it happens way the hell out there and nobody gives a damn. Sorry about that. That time in May, we went to Hydro. There was a few of us from our community that told them, what are you doing in preparation for the flood? They said, what flood? The flood that's coming. There's not gonna be a flood. What are you talking about? How do you know that? I know Manitoba Hydro claims to have a crystal ball to foresee and foretell the future all the time, but 99% of the time they're wrong all the time. They laughed, they leaned back in their chair and laughed at us when we told them that it was gonna flood that year. And what happened? It flooded. They released so much water down the lower Churchill River system, only to save the Keeyask Dam on the lower Nelson River. Because us back home on Split Lake, we were receiving pictures from people who were taking pictures of water going over the dikes during the construction of the Keeyask Dam. And then they said, no, we're doing it for you. We're doing it for Split Lake to keep from going over the severance lines, to keep from breaching the agreements. What did they really do it for? Who did they really do it for? Did they do it for us? Did they do it to save the dam? Who knows? But what we do know is what it did, right, Les? It ruined the whole river system and it ruined the whole lake. The augmented flow program, oh my goodness, man. We could talk about that all week. Get your cuts ready. But 2017, in the flood of 2017, they did it to save the Keeyask Dam, is what we believe. When they released all that torrent of water down the lower Churchill River, then ultimately, what happened after that? What happened to the townspeople of Churchill? They essentially got cut off because of the amount of snow. When we were talking to Manitoba Hydro about the amounts and what they were doing with the water in May, I think it was May 17, 2017. Oh, we're gonna hold this much back here, we're gonna release this much here, and we'll let a little bit go over here, and we'll let a little bit go over there, and we'll do this over here. You'll be fine, you'll be okay. Then he said, oh, we'll release 70,000, all of a sudden 80,000, 90,000. And then he came at us with 120,000 cubic feet per second of water that they released down the lower Churchill River system. But you know what? Their gauging stations only read that far. In scientific terms, I guess that was a scientific hypothesis, a guess. Let's just call it that, a guess. Sacrifice the few for the good of the many. That's what it was. There's so many things that have happened and they're still going on up north right now that you wouldn't believe us sometimes. You wouldn't understand. And sometimes I keep thinking to myself, why do I keep repeating myself all the time? Why do I keep telling people that I'm never gonna see ever again in my life? And then when I step into boardroom after boardroom after boardroom, and then there's a slew of people sitting in front of us, I keep feeling more and more like as if we're on trial every time. Is this person telling the truth? Is this person stretching it? That's the attitudes that we get with Manitoba Hydro when we're sitting in front of them. Some of them that we sit in front of are very cold and callous and blatant and unsympathetic with our plight. You see, we share the same fate as the people upstream of us in South Indian Lake that have been deeply affected and impacted by Manitoba Hydro. I keep saying the people of the whitefish and the people of the sturgeon. They say you can't touch the same water twice. You can, because my brother up here, upriver did. And I'm touching it down over here too. It touches us. They say you can't touch the same waters twice. It's touched us already in many ways that you can't understand or fathom. We can't take our kids out on the water anymore like the way our grandfathers used to, our parents. We can't take our kids out there and teach them what our families taught us growing up. That ability has been taken away because the spirit of the water that was once there is not there anymore. It's gone. They say they always come back to the same thing that I've been told time and time again. Robert, think outside the box for a second. I can't, because we are a people of the circle. And my sister Isla was the one who said that. And she really put it, she really made a big difference in a lot of people that she said that to. Think outside the box. We're not a people of the box, we're a people of the circle. Everything is connected. One way or another, it's all connected. That's all I'd like to say for now, because I've already talked too much. That was it.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think we have just a glimpse into what it is to be in the shadow of a dam. And that's one of the things that you said to me when we first met, and it has stuck with me ever since, you know, to be in the shadow of a dam and in the shadow of another now. And that's, I think, a very powerful visual image for those of us who are living in the South and benefiting from a lot of the impacts in your community, in your territory, and in your own family. So thank you for having the courage and to come and speak and share part of that with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I forgot about that too.
That's why we make such a good team.
Yeah. Like I told my daughter on our way out here, things come to me as they're being said or things I see. I told her like a Kodak moment, or more like a Polaroid. It comes but slowly and takes long to develop. But I don't know if my daughter's ever seen a Polaroid. But now I do remember what I said to you. Born underneath the shadow of one dam, only to die underneath the shadow of another. But no father expects a child to leave before him. I always thought that I would be the one to go first before my son. But I guess he had to go up ahead, because he realizes how fat and lazy I got being a councillor. That's what he used to say to me. And I had to share that. Because those were his words. And another thing that he said to me when we won that class action lawsuit on drinking water, he says to me, Dad, you know what? That lawsuit that you guys won, that we won, that the nation won, the community won, that's never going to be enough. Not enough for our people, because we've lost too much. That can never be replaced. And that really woke me up. Because that day I was going, yay, we won. He really slapped it home when he came around the corner and just put his hand on my shoulder. And says, Dad, what are you happy for? You know that's not going to be enough. It'll never be enough. And I thought, holy smokes, this kid's only 17, 18, right? And he saw past all of that. Wise beyond his years, that kid. Anyway, thank you.
And that work will continue. And I think, talking about that circle, all of the, how we relate to each other, thinking not outside of the box, but inside of the circle is important. And I just wanted to, on that note, maybe ask all of the contributors to the book that are here to maybe stand and be acknowledged, because this is a very important collective work. And you've done such amazing, you've put in such an amazing effort to share parts of your story through this book. So I'll invite you to stand. I know some of you have been referred to already, but if you don't mind just standing to be acknowledged. Well, my colleague Jill makes her way to the microphone.
I'll sit.
Yeah, you can just, okay, great. So were you being all shy? Les and Will, Terry, Byron, Ramona, Asya, yeah. Thank you so much for your contributions. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Jill to talk a tiny bit about the book, and then we'll have a few minutes for some questions and book signing. And again, thank you all so much for your interest and for your time tonight.
Thanks, Aimée, and thanks, Robert. You know, we really wanted to tell the story of Keeyask because it's emblematic of similar projects that have happened in the last 60 years in northern Manitoba. This is not just one project, it's one in a series of projects, and it's emblematic of similar projects throughout Canada and the world in regions where hydroelectric power is the predominant form of energy production. So this is a story that we felt needed to be told because so many others would see themselves in it. And we were hoping so deeply that we could learn lessons from Keeyask that would influence you know, our government and industry and just other like-minded folks around the world. And Keeyask is a story of struggle, as Robert has shared, you know, just a tiny bit, but so deeply in such a short time, you know, what that struggle is like. And, you know, Keeyask, it's a struggle of still that we have in Canada to try to transition from thinking of our northern and remote lands as simply a northern resource frontier. And we've struggled for decades now, led by the work of former BC Supreme Court Justice Thomas Berger to change that perception, to see these lands as northern homelands. So not an empty place, not just somewhere out there that doesn't matter, but the homelands of many Indigenous people for thousands of years. And just today in Newfoundland, Prince Charles spoke about this. You know, and he was very careful, in my estimation. I certainly don't know how his press, you know, management works, but I feel that he was very careful to use exactly those words to acknowledge Indigenous homelands, and that those lands have been stewarded for thousands of years by those that live there and have lived there, you know. And so this is a struggle. It's still a struggle, which is amazing to me. It's amazing to me that we still struggle to see these places in a different way. And it's also a struggle to have governments and industry acknowledge and take responsibility for the total impact of all of the development that has happened across decades and that will continue to unfold. It's amazing to me that that's also still a struggle, because we can all clearly see that the total impact on people, families, communities, generations is clearly not encapsulated by any one project. It's all of it together. You know, and it's the total effect that we experience as people, and then that matters to our lived experiences. So Keeyask began construction. They began construction on it in 2014. Power was first generated in just last year in 2021. And in those intervening years, we put this book together. And so the book that we have for you is really not about a past project. Keeyask is not in the past. It's very much a current project. And this book is very much about the future of decision-making, you know, in this province and across the country. And the lessons in it are meant to do that. They're meant to be messages that can inform future decision-making. This was very important to us because really the story of Keeyask is only half told. If you look at the amount of power capacity that has been developed so far. It's approximately 5,000 megawatts. And after Keeyask, we are looking at potentially another approximately 4,300 megawatts of power still to be developed on the Nelson River complex. So that is extremely significant. So if you think that the story is done, or that all of this is in the past, no, it is not. It is not at all in the past. There are plenty of important decisions to come, and that's why the voices in this book really are so very important. There's so many people that contributed to the book. Each and every author in the book has extremely, I think, important insights to share. There's so many lessons, and I'll just share a couple because I know we're short on time, but one of the lessons is really around the need for the democratization of environmental oversight for better protection of vulnerable communities. And that's one of the lessons that Byron Williams in chapter 1 talks about so eloquently. And we need to have ways to make these decisions earlier and better. We need to change the way that we evaluate the significance of impacts. Part of my role as an expert witness in the hearings was to take a look at how cumulative impact was assessed by Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro. And just, it's stunning to me that the proponent could come to the conclusion that there were no significant adverse cumulative effects of that dam, of Keeyask. How is that? Everybody knows that is not true. And it's admitted, it is multiple times in the impact statement that things have been significantly altered. And yet we rely upon a significant test that is very technical and does not take into account the lived experience of people that live with the impacts. So the final lesson that I'll mention, again, all of this is in the book for you to read, but a final lesson is that we really have to abandon the commit first, review later process that we are following. We have to stop assessing projects in little tiny pieces so that nobody notices really the bigger picture. We have a process in Canada of assessing mega projects that always occurs in phases. Okay, so first phase, a road, just the road. Not for anything, it's not for anything, nothing to see here, but let's get that road built and going. Okay, now we would like to assess a work camp. Let's just look at that. Oh, nothing to see here, just a work camp. What could be the major impact of that? Well, there isn't one, right? And on and on and on until we achieve what is known as lock-in. And Byron also talks about this in his chapter. And what it means is that we are now so far down the road of investing in infrastructure that the decision to approve is almost a foregone conclusion. And that is literally what happens across Canada. It's happening right now in the Ring of Fire region of Ontario for the mineral mining developments there that are scheduled to happen. Exactly that, exactly the same thing. So there's so much that needs to change. There's so many lessons in the book. We hope you enjoy them. We're glad that you're still, with us here at 8, and we would really like to hear from you and to hear your questions. And just before that, I do want to thank everyone who funded our research, and I'll just quickly name them. So the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, including the Winiscatan and the Decolonizing Water Research Networks, the Universities of Ottawa and Saskatchewan, and of course, University of Manitoba Press. And we want to thank McNally for hosting us tonight. So I think that's all from me, and I hope that we'll be able to talk with you for a little bit before you go.
So if any of you do have any questions, please just raise your hand and I'll place the microphone dramatically in front of you. If you are watching on YouTube right now and have any questions also, please feel free to write them in the chat. Was there anything?
So first of all, thank you, especially Robert, for such eloquent and heartbreaking testimony that the evil effects of colonialism are not something in the past. They're going on right now. We're participating in them. So my question is, what can we do? How can we help with this struggle?
Oh boy. Yeah, I had to ask that one. Truth and reconciliation is what comes to mind. Forcing Canada's hand in this province to make the changes and implement the changes that they say that they want to work on so diligently with the First Nations people. Because it's not just for us that we're fighting for, it's for you too. The impacts that we're feeling, you're feeling them too. The environment that we fight for is not ours. Us, the First Nation, it's yours too. It's all of ours to share. As I'm going to share what I heard from an elder, Ellen Cook. I don't know if you've met her. Okay. She said to me when I missed the with the Nistamayibe. Tagwe basijik uta aski when I when the Europeans first came here to this continent, they didn't see color. They just saw people that needed help. Because we're such a kind and loving people, we just wanted to help. So help us back. That's all we ask.
So I think building upon that too is, we're a group that's gathered today and people that are, mostly like-minded, that are, have some knowledge of this and have made their way here, but sharing, with others, bringing awareness to these issues, taking political action relating to this as well. And, like Robert has said, it's time to turn those tables and really make sure that decision-making going forward takes into account the real impacts on northern, remote, and Indigenous communities. And I think part of that, which we haven't mentioned yet, is decision-making in accordance with Indigenous legal orders and in process that is grounded in those Indigenous laws and legal orders as well. That's my area. So that's my plug for that piece, but I think it's absolutely significant. It can make real change. What we saw in the Keeyask hearings was that there were a two-track approach, an Indigenous evaluation and sort of the Western scientific route. And so I have a chapter in the book that speaks to that. But understanding how those decisions are made inside of the circle is very different than trying to think outside of the box, as Robert has told us. And we need to do a lot more of thinking within that circle, within environmental evaluation in Canada and within the province of Manitoba, especially as we consider, as Jill has said, the potential for a lot more hydroelectric development here, and some that could be solely for an export market, right? That goes way beyond the needs of Manitobans.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to that, and this is another idea from the book, is that we really have to demand a higher level of corporate honesty and institutional honesty to sort of say, hey, the emperor has no clothes here. I don't want to talk about a road. I want to talk about the total impact. I'm not willing to pretend I don't see the bigger picture here, because there is a bigger picture. We all know it. But the narrative is very carefully focused, and the conversation is very carefully narrowed when really that's not the truth. It's not the truth. And part of truth and reconciliation is the truth. We don't get, in my opinion, we don't collectively get to the reconciliation until there is truth. There has to be space for truth, and we have to demand the truth about what's really happening.
One other thing, when you're talking about the truth, 2017, when we went to Manitoba Hydro, and they told us, oh, we went to the province and asked them for their permission to deviate that amount of water down the lower Churchill River system. That's what they told us. We went to the province. That was the first of the 5 meetings that we had with Hydro on just the 2017 talks. At the 5th and final meeting, Hydro said, oh no, we didn't have to go to the province. It was well within our rights and our permits to do what it is that we did by releasing that amount of water down the lower Churchill River system. Wait a minute. But you said at the first meeting you went to the province. That's the kind of attitudes that we see when we meet in Manitoba Hydro. They belittle us. They think we don't matter. That they can lie to us through their teeth sitting in front of us. They'll shake our hands and smile at us and hug us and call us their friends. Meanwhile, they're sinking a blade into our hearts and smiling at us at the same time. That's how it feels.
There's a chapter in the book on the honor of the crown. And so that'll be my question to you. Once you've read the book, you know, what do you feel is the honor of the crown? And what is good development? So those are 2 takeaway questions that I want to leave with you as an audience. Some of you are thinking about your questions or comments.
Thanks for putting the mic dramatically on my face. I guess just following up on the first question, Churchill River diversion has to be relicensed by 2026. If you were giving one piece of advice, either to government or to affected communities, what would be the advice that you would give?
What was that?
On CRD relicensing, what advice would we give the province or communities about entering into that process? That's a question from Byron Williams.
I think Les would really like to take part in answering this question because he was part of this book too. And Les is somebody that I wish would be given the opportunity to speak as well on this. Because he and I, we have the same thoughts on this, but I would really like to have Les answer
that. I'll never put a microphone in front of me, as a lot of people learn. So bring back hot. You better bring some food. I'll try to be short. The CRD final license was issued last year in April. It's supposed to be under review in 2026. That's just an arbitrary date. It means absolutely nothing as far as process and honor. Nobody can define what's going to happen there. It's almost a given Manitoba Hydro will be granted an extension. Meaning what? It means nothing again. That's when you look behind these processes and these rubber stamps, there is nothing there. I'm pretty well versed on not the legalities, Brian would be Byron, but the actual realities. So maybe to answer Byron's question is stop. Why do you need a CRD final license? Reverse the flow back to its natural course. The CRD was questionable when it was planned and implemented in the late 60s and early 70s. It is still a questionable need. We have an excess of power generation in this province. When they dump water out of Missy Falls that Robert articulated, in Hydro's own words, that's wasted water. It means they can't use it. Yet they destroy us holding back this water. And then when they come near their license limits, they dump it. It generates no revenue at all. They destroy our community, our lands and waters, then they dump this water and destroy the lower Churchill into Robert's lands. Wasted water, doesn't generate 1 penny of it. And you look further into this, it gets real dark. All of a sudden on paper, this water hydro is paying itself off with this water. It's coming out of your pockets. You're subsidizing US power sales, roughly about 75% of every dollar they sell. It's coming out of Manitoba ratepayers' pockets. So going back to the need, they don't need a CRD final license. They might not need CRD. They want it, definitely, they want it. So, I mean, I could go on and on, I probably went on time, but you know, it needs a demand change. One step towards so-called reconciliation would be not reissuing that license. It's easy, it can be done by a stroke of a pen. That's how simple it is. There's no defined process for relicensing. What is a review of a license? We'll just look at it and give it back to you. Why not remove it? Or go back, or even maybe, why not Hydro and the Crown honor its own written word? What's wrong with that? There is a CRD interim license that was written by Manitoba Hydro in 1973. They haven't followed that since 1979. Why not go back to your own word and honor your word? You know, the augmented flow program was never contemplated in the 1973 license, but now all of a sudden by magic, it's the CRD final license. It's nothing similar to the original interim license. So either get rid of it or go back and honor your word and follow the 1973 terms. That's a starting point.
Yes. And then the creativity of this book and some of the work that each of us has been doing in relation to hydro in northern communities and in our own ways. I actually think that part of the answer that I would give to your question, Byron, is that there should be a presumptive Indigenous process that leads the consideration of the question about final licensing, and that any provincial process could follow that, but would have to be responsive to an Indigenous Commission of Inquiry on CRD prior to anything happening within the political and environmental assessment realm in Manitoba. That would be my recommendation.
Give us a seat at the table.
I'm wondering, on the question of governance, whether any of you could comment on the fairly recently formed Shadow Hydro Board that was organized by Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, MEJC, that I think has grassroots voices from the north and from the south. I'm not sure whether academics are represented. And I don't know details, but you mentioned Ellen Cook, and I know she's on that shadow board and is a very credible voice, passionate voice like your own, Robert. So I'm wondering whether I dare to be hopeful that this shadow board, whose stated purpose is to hold hydro and the province to account, whether they may be a forceful player in these issues and speak on behalf of all of us.
Any little voice that can speak up within a crowd of many, that can bring up other voices to convey the same message, is a voice that's worth listening to. Any voice from any part of this province that we can use and utilize to share and spread that same message is more than welcome to try what they can, to do what they can for what it is that we're trying to do. Going CRD, one thing that they said, that the sediment load coming down the Churchill River system, that Split Lake would be able to handle that sediment load, but it can't. There's so many little different things that we can't even mention here because of the amount of time that we have that make up one part of each effect that creates a domino effect up to a bigger picture that we're trying to describe to you here. A little amoeba. Oh man. I don't know what we can't say to you all that it is that we need to say within such a short little period of time for the amount of time that we've experienced living the effects that we've been living. And it's hard. It's hard to put into words the feelings that we feel. Like the two words that I spoke of just a while ago, environmental racism. I didn't know you could put those two words together. So I don't know what other words there are out there that I could put together to convey what it is that we need to share with you here today to get that point across, the message across, that what is happening in the North is not fair, that it's illegal. Like I said before when I spoke about the tailings ponds disaster in BC, it got coverage. The news covered it right away. They were all over it. But what happened in the North in 2017 with that flood, nobody cared to listen. Churchill was cut off. People asked, how did it happen? The province and Hydro said, oh, the snow happened because we had a big snowfall that year. But what two rivers run parallel to the tracks along the rail line to Churchill are the Deer and Dog rivers. When Manitoba Hydro dumped that much water down the lower Churchill River system, they inadvertently created a whole slew of other little missies all along the way because there was 4 or 5 foot thick chunks of ice just scouring the shores of the Churchill River all along its length from Missy all the way to the Hudson's Bay. That created that flood that took out that rail line over there. I'm not the only one that says this. Other people know it too, because we know the rivers and the lakes up there and where they go and where they come from and where they flow. So we're not crazy. We know that territory. We know what happened.
In some ways, it's hard to put into words, Robert, and I know that you spend a lot of time on the land and, seeing it, seeing the images, seeing the land, being in relationship with it is so incredibly important. That's a message that you shared with me in the past. And Michael's here from Winniskatan. There's some really important filmmaking that's been done that shows some of the images of the Keeyask development and other dams in northern Manitoba. So I'd highly recommend that you have a look at their website and see for yourselves some of the things that we're putting into words, but see the images that are associated to that.
And Aimée and I are keeping this conversation going with our next project together, which is another edited volume about mega projects and extractivism in Indigenous territories in Canada. And so we're trying to take the lens even broader and look at some other similar cases across Canada, including the Site C Dam on the Peace River, including Muskrat Falls Dam in the hydroelectric project in Newfoundland, and also looking at the Ring of Fire mineral mining development in Ontario. And we're looking at potential reforms, indigenization of the environmental impact assessment process, among other things, and continuing the theme, the conversation on the exploration of what is good development. So we'll stay plugged into this. I'm sure all of you will. And we probably should wrap up, I suppose. Yes, it's 20 after 8, so we'll move on to the book signing, I suppose, and we'd love to continue to talk to you there.
And thank you again, Robert, for joining us. And we thought we'd sandwich you to make it even more enjoyable to be here. But, it is a long drive from Tataskweyak, and your presence here has been really impactful in terms of sharing that story. And it's so nice to see, other faces that are here that have really important stories that are part of this book and continue be part of the untold stories that are coming to the fore, and only because there are people, grandmothers. Ramona, your words about being a grandmother, mother, grandmother, and that work that you do, you know, that's what we leave as legacy. And thank you for putting your words into this book that is here with us today, that we have the pleasure of launching. So, miigwech.
One other thing, my baby girl is getting me my 10th grandchild. Thanks so much. Our little hunter. Congratulations.
Thank you so much to all of you. And thank you for sitting here and listening and for all your questions this evening. We will move along to the signing portion, so we'll ask you all just to remain seated for just a moment while we move Aimée and Jill just over to the table, which is beside our cash desk. The store is closed, but please rest assured we will not be rushing you out. You may feel free to buy copies of the book and get them signed before wandering out. The only odd thing that I do have to mention is because we have closed down the rest of the store, if you don't mind just spending your time around the central part of the store, that would be wonderful. And possibly buying your book before you get into line, just to expedite that. That is the driest housekeeping note I could possibly offer after such an incredible evening, so I do apologize for that. But it has been such an incredible privilege to spend this evening with you and with all the contributors to the volume, and with Robert thank you so much for making your way down, to the University of Manitoba Press for publishing this book, and to all of you once again. Thank you very much and have a wonderful night.